Welcome to another edition of A Voice to the Gentile Church. My name is Jim Wingerter, and next to me is Pastor Roger Diaz. Dolores is out of town. So I was floored at looking at stuff that you shared with me today, that we have a country within our country. And it's boggling to me in the ways that we've been taught American history and how this nation was founded, that so it's impossible for this thing to have just come to be. It had to have been given a recognition by the American government. It's in the middle of the state of Iowa.
I haven't done enough research on it to really speak extensively on it. I'm going to have to do that, of course, but I know a little bit about it.
Okay.
It was sort of given a platform.
Had to have been.
And that platform had to be given by our government. But I think it goes beyond our government. I think it's an international affair.
It's called the global country of world peace. It doesn't even have an
it's
honest name.
It's situated right in, I think it's in rural Iowa.
Iowa.
Right? In rural Iowa.
Corn, Indians, bison.
No, they are a sovereign nation existing in this nation with their own currency.
Yeah.
It's called the Ram.
So it's very, very Hindu.
Yeah, and it's Hindu. It's basically a Hindu nation here in this country, comprising of nuclear physicists, geophysicists, some of the most talented minds that exist today. Some of our greatest scientists are a part of this Hindu country right here in this country. And it wasn't featured by any media outlet. It wasn't presented to the American people by the government of the American people. Someone did an expose on it, and it got on the internet, and it's been on the internet for about a month or so, and so it's making its way around the internet. People are like, what's going on? And so it's been fact-checked, and the only challenge to the video that's been put out is that it's not really a country. If they have their own currency, then yeah.
Right.
They have a leader. I think the leader's name is, what's his name?
Tony
Nader. And for some reason, that name is familiar. Yeah, a neuroscientist. Yeah. So he is for lack of a better word, he is the president of this country.
Right. They just call him a leader.
He's the leader, yeah. Well,
he's not a president. He's the man in charge.
I think they would be hard pressed to say president, because then for sure you're a country. But he's the leader of this country, and it's called the Global Nation for World Peace. So you know it's a globalist effort, right?
Yes, sure.
But the great questions that come to mind is, how is it that this can happen without the American people knowing about it?
Right. Nobody voted on this.
Who's paying for this? Is the American people paying for this? How could they have a currency where one ram, which is their dollar, one ram, is the equivalent of $10
and 10 euros.
And 10 euros.
They weren't on the same scale last time I looked, and
so how is that even possible that can happen, and no one knows about it? It's a bizarre thing, and of course its Hindu foundation is even more bizarre. We know, and I really have to dig into this and unpack this carefully, but we know that many of the nuclear physicists that are a part of this global country are involved in CERN. And we've talked about CERN a couple times on this program.
Yes.
And what is the essence of CERN? Well, it's a 17-mile circumference hadron collider. That's where they spin atoms as fast as the speed of light, and then they ultimately clash them or ram them into each other. And they're looking for bosons. They're looking for the Higgs boson. They're looking for
the God
antimatter,
element.
the God element, God matter, all sorts of very strange things. And we've talked about that before. Stephen Hawking, remember Stephen Hawking?
Right.
He was very, very concerned about CERN.
Yeah.
He was very concerned about CERN, and he said that they are tinkering with something that they're unable to fix should something go wrong. something along those lines. He said,
right.
So he was cognizant of something going wrong. Well, there's no way to verify the things that are being said about CERN, but a few years ago something went wrong. They had sort of a Manhattan Project type incident where things went really strange in the context of their experiments, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know if it's true or not. I'm not going to talk about what the rumors are because they're just rumors.
Right.
But what do we know about CERN? About 5 years ago, they put a statue of Lord Shiva, who's the Hindu god Shiva, outside of this facility in Switzerland. And Lord Shiva is represented by a circular object. He's in the middle of it. He's got many arms, and he's in a dancing position. This is the Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva, according to the Hindu Vedas, the Hindu narratives, worked in conjunction with Kali, who was the goddess of destruction. And he would call upon Kali whenever necessary to bring destruction. So we're talking about the Hindu Vedas here, and we're talking about demigods and the activities of these demigods based on the Hindu stories. Now, we don't know how true these things are, but one thing for sure, and I think most people agree with this who look into this with our perspective, the Hindu Vedas or the Hindu stories, they all point to what we consider to be the pre-flood civilization, when Nephilim were on the earth, the sons of the fallen angels.
Right.
And so the whole, it's almost a universe of stories, a whole, array of stories that's centered around Hinduism. There are hundreds of them, hundreds and hundreds of narratives, all based on what occurred during that period before the flood. That's how we see it. All of these, most of the narratives or the Vedas, they tie into the ancient mythologies of the ancient world. They tie in real nicely with them. So there's something credible about their narratives, their Vedas. Hindus certainly believe that these things actually happen. For them, for the Hindus, they're not metaphoric, they're literal. These things actually happen. So the scientists at CERN, they're worshiping Lord Shiva. They're worshiping Shiva. And again, Shiva, upon necessity, would call upon the Hindu goddess Kali to carry out his destructive actions. He himself wasn't destructive, but he would use Kali for destruction.
Convenient.
So Kali, the goddess of destruction. Now, I don't want to go too far afield at this point, but the worship of Kali involves human sacrifice, human blood sacrifice. It's integral. It's integral in the worship of Kali. It's a heinous form of worship. This any worship that involves any paganistic worship that involves human sacrifice is in the realm of bizarre and crazy. But the people that are worshiping Lord Shiva, by virtue, is worshiping Kali.
Right.
And so the question is, are they worshiping Kali in the traditional way by offering blood sacrifice? Because that's how you do it.
Right.
I lived in a community in Trinidad that was Hindu, about 80% Hindu. And every year they would worship Kali, and it would involve the blood of a human being. Every year they did it. And we call it abortions. They called it a sacrifice, an offering to Kali,
right,
to appease Kali, so she would not bring destruction. So my biggest question with this Nation for International Peace, or however they call themselves, what do they call themselves?
They specifically, the verbiage was Global Country of World Peace.
Yeah. My biggest question with what's happening there is, I listed 3 questions just now, but my biggest question is, what is the connection between them and CERN and the worship of Kali, the worship of Lord Shiva, the worship of Ram, and all of the other Hindu gods that are worshipped? Why are these people that are so incredibly intelligent and professional in their science worshiping Hindu gods? What's that all about? Right. What is the attraction in the scientific world towards Hinduism? I believe it has to do with the whole idea of the Hadron Collider, bringing about, well, once the atoms that clash, they bring about an unseen realm. And I believe that these people are basically Hindus, and they're believing that by their clashing of atoms, they can invoke the Hindu gods, the conditions under which the Hindu gods would be materialized. No, I'm not the only person that have said that.
Okay.
I believe it to be true, and that's why they've all gravitated towards Hinduism. It's a bizarre thing.
It seems strange that if the CERN, everything concerning CERN is in Switzerland, what are they doing in Iowa? These are the people running the show.
Well, they're certainly tied into a global order. They're certainly given. They're certainly being given, authority and the ability to exist, the encouragement to exist by the globalists. They are globalists in that sense. CERN is a very, very strange arrangement. It's paid for mostly by U.S. taxpayers.
No doubt.
And it's a multi-trillion-dollar operation. Yeah. And they've been clashing atoms there for 12 years, looking for results. And as of the last 5 years or so, there's been a blackout. There's been no information coming out of CERN because too much information initially came out. And they don't want that information coming out. So clearly there's some sort of a connection between this Global Nation for International Peace and CERN. There is a connection there. And it just makes me wonder, why is it that these people are given carte blanche to do whatever they want, even though their greatest mind, Stephen Hawking, warned them about their activities?
Yeah.
It just, again, it epitomizes the incredibly sorry state of existence that we find ourselves in.
And they're so caught up in it that a word of warning is not heeded. Foolishly aggressive.
So that's something we ought to keep our eyes on and see where they go with it. Yeah. Hinduism, the amazing thing about Hinduism is I grew up with Hindus, and most of my friends were Hindus. I've been to many pujas. A puja is a week-long prayer meeting. Every day you meet for 2 or 3 hours. I've been to many of them. I've eaten all their parasad and all of their foods given to idols. As a kid, I did that. And I listened to their narratives. I was never emotionally stirred by their narratives, by their Vedas. The Vedas were always interesting to me and awkward and weird, the stories. But even as a kid, a 13, 14-year-old kid, I recognized some of the Vedas, how they corresponded with Greek mythology. So now as a believer, looking back in retrospect concerning all that I saw back then, it's obvious to me that Hinduism is basically the stories, the narratives of the pre-flood civilization when fallen angels took daughters of men and demigods, Nephilim, were upon the earth. And all of their actions, all of their follies, basically is what the Vedas are. I don't recommend anyone go out and try to study the Vedas, but they are bizarre. They are bizarre stories of demigods fighting against other demigods, fighting over women, fighting over territory, fighting over cities. Lord Vishnu made a Vramana. What was a Vramana? A Vramana was a flying machine that can destroy a city in one zap. And they warred against each other. Very, very strange religion, Hinduism is. And Hinduism is a religion. It's not a religion in the same way we think of religion. Hinduism is, well, we'll talk about that a little later. But we're gonna visit this again when we talk about our question tonight.
Okay.
So, we have to keep our eyes on this Global Nation for International Peace. And exactly what do they mean, Global Nation for International Peace? By their efforts, they're going to bring about peace. I guess they take the position that many take, that Hinduism is this benevolent, peace-inducing type religion, which it isn't.
No.
Which it absolutely isn't. I can speak about this for a long time. Having grown up in a Hindu community, I had a brother and a sister who converted to Hinduism in different forms, and I saw the horrible effect of it. So I can speak a lot on Hinduism, which I won't at this point. But what about The Chosen? Speaking of
the television series.
Advent movements, what's going on with The Chosen?
Well, there was a recent docu that was done that kind of exposed, and I'm glad there's other people on the planet that are paying attention to what's going on here and raising red flags about. And a lot of Christians don't want to hear us right now saying what we're about to say, but we have to say it because the truth needs to be exposed.
So, The Chosen. All right. You remember the Jesus movie of the 1970s, right?
Yeah.
All right. This was the first time Jesus was presented in any Hebraic aspect. First time ever.
Right.
He wore a talit. He had tzitzis on the talit. And they presented him truly Hebraic. It's the first time ever, as far as I know. But what was different about the Jesus movie, I think it was Campus Crusade that put that one out.
Okay.
Of the 1970s. They followed rigidly the book of Luke. I mean, literally, the script of the movie was the book of Luke. It was a little awkward to use the book of Luke as a script, but they managed to do it. And yes, it was a little awkward, but you knew that you were getting the actual book of Luke. They even did it in Hebrew, which, so you're not sure about their motives, but they did it in Hebrew. And I have the recording of it in Hebrew where they did the entire book of Luke in this movie in Hebrew. And so that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's inspiring. That's pure. It's rich. They didn't offer you any untrue biblical narratives in that movie. Now, here comes The Chosen. The Chosen is certainly endeavoring to present Jesus Hebraic.
Right, and it comes after a few fiascos. So remember, Universal produced The Last Temptation of Christ, and they couldn't understand why the Christian community hated it, but it was so bizarrely not biblical that.
So the last, that was just an abomination. I'll use the word abomination. So there was another Jesus movie that came out, which is The Passion.
Right.
And many Christians
followed that.
Many Christians love The Passion. I never saw The Passion, and I never will. I don't subscribe to it. I will not recommend that you go see it. Why? I'll tell you why. Because the movie Passion, which was produced by Mel Gibson, who got instructions and was directed in the production of that movie by his uncle, who is a high-rank Jesuit in Australia. Himself, Mel Gibson is a Jesuit. So what is the connection between The Passion, the Jesuits, and the people of Israel, the Jewish nation?
Right.
There's a real connection, and here's the connection. During the pogroms in Spain and Portugal, France, Italy, Iberia, and even the pogroms in as far as in Romania and other parts of the Roman Catholic world, every time, almost without exception, every time they wanted to stir up a pogrom, a riot, they would put together a play.
Passion play.
And the name of the play was The Passion.
Yeah.
And in this play, they would put great emphasis on the brutality that Jesus experienced the night before the cross at the hands of the Jews. Every time. And what would happen? There would be a pogrom. The people would get all stirred up. A Jesuit priest most of the times will get up and preach fervently about the hatred of the Jews towards Jesus and that they're Christ killers. It came after every presentation of the Passion. And they would go out and destroy Jewish communities. Whole Jewish communities have been destroyed. People have been packed into synagogues. Children, people, all manner of people, and synagogues burned to the ground because of the Passion. Mm-hmm. So when the movie came out, I knew about this, and I said, I'm not going to be a part of it. And yet, in the movie, there was tremendous emphasis on his suffering at the hands of the Jewish leaders. Right. Same narrative, same play, just presented on a large screen. Of course, many Christians got out, got really emotional about his suffering, didn't go out and persecute Jews, but the history of it is tainted with blood.
Yes, terribly.
Tainted with the blood of Israel. So I have nothing to do with it. So the only Jesus movie that I can identify with again is the Campus Crusade movie, the Jesus movie, because they did a really good job with it. Now let's talk about The Chosen.
Yes.
Right. The Chosen, they made deliberate attempts to present Jesus as Hebraic and his disciples. They all wear tzitzis. There are many references to Shabbat, many references to very Jewish things.
Right.
Okay. Now, there might be an ulterior motive behind that. But,
there invariably is an ulterior motive behind that.
So from that, from that point of view, okay, they get low marks for that, from my point of view.
Yeah.
Now, I would say this. Dallas Jenkins, he is an evangelical, right? He's not of the same faith as most of the people that produce the Chosen. Most of the people in the production part of the Chosen are Mormons. Right. And they do slip into the scenes and into the narrative, the stories of the Chosen, very Mormon ideology, ideas. Yeah. So a lot of what you get in the Chosen is actually Mormonism.
Yes. Taken
directly out of the Book of Mormon.
Right.
Right. So that's a problem, right? If we're not going to feature the issues with Mormonism or the Mormon religion right now, but there are real problems with the Mormons. Their connection to the Freemasons and secret societies is well known, and they're nefarious. They're well known for being involved in the Freemason movement. That's a problem. If you know anything about the Freemasons, you know that you don't want to, as a believer, you don't want to have anything to do with it. Their rites and their rituals are all paganistic.
Yep.
I mean, overtly paganistic. So what is the problem? What is the danger of the Chosen? Very simple. And it's so simple. A lot of their presentations are biblical. But then the majority of them are not. They're just stories that they've tacked on to the biblical narrative.
Right.
To make it more movie oriented, to make it more entertaining. And they attempt to strike at a Christian value in presenting these stories, which by and large they do. The problem is they don't mention enough, they don't feature enough that their production is not to be taken as biblical fact.
Scripture, right.
They don't present that enough. And so many people are looking at these episodes, and how many seasons? I think they have 4 seasons up to now, with 7 or 8 episodes per season. So they've done a lot of these episodes. And about maybe 10% of it, 15% of it is actually biblically verifiable. In other words, the scenes are biblical. But the majority of it isn't. But people are walking away from those movies saying, isn't it wonderful what Jesus did with Nicodemus, how he interacted with Nicodemus? And there is, of course, the reality that in years to come, people will look at The Chosen as something that's biblically grounded, and it isn't.
Right.
In other words, according to the book of The Chosen, this is what happened. So I will come along and say, wait a minute.
Or these are the details that occurred between these events that weren't discussed.
I would come along and say, wait a minute. Nicodemus met Jesus in Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives, not in Capernaum. They would say, no, it happened in Capernaum. Why? Because that's what The Chosen illustrated to us. Even though it's clear that when Nicodemus interacted with Jesus, it was in Jerusalem. He was in Jerusalem for Sukkot. And Nicodemus approached him. Not in Capernaum. You say, well, what's the big deal with that? Capernaum, Jerusalem, it's only, 75 miles. But in the ancient world, that was 3 days or 4 days,
3 or 4 days
week of walking.
Right.
So he wasn't in Capernaum.
Right.
And so is that important? Of course it is, because that's not the only instance of where things are wrong. You have many wrong portrayals in The Chosen. And again, years from now, even months from now, people go off and maybe even preach from the gospel of the chosen. So effectively, they're giving us a false narrative which amounts to a false Christ. So the actor who plays Jesus, Jonathan Romy, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. He might be Italian. Jonathan Romy, I don't know much about him. I know that he is very, very sort of ecumenical. He is a Jesuit. He's also a Freemason. He's made those statements before. He's prone to being a bit radical, like most Jesuits are.
Yes.
Right? I have nothing against him, right, necessarily. But his portrayals of Jesus, in many cases, are excellent. I mean, really, really good. I like a lot of what he does. But you can't help but think, if he is a Jesuit and if he's in fact a Freemason, isn't that somehow influencing the projection of the shows of the show, The Chosen? Of course it is. Of course it is. But more so than him being a Jesuit or any of those things, is the reality that is being produced by Mormons. Again, we're not going to, maybe at some other time in the future, we'll talk about the Mormons and what is so, dangerous about the Mormons.
Right.
But not tonight. But the Mormon religion is basically a cult.
Yeah.
It is a cult. Much like, the Hindus that we talk about over there in Iowa, it's a cult. It is a classic cult. Remember Jim Jones, right? That's the epitome of what a cult is. Jim Jones and the Branch Davidians went to Guyana and did what they did. This movement with Tony Nader and the Global Nation for International Peace is very much a cult as well. You'd say, but we can trust them because they're all very, very educated people. They're scientists. Really? Scientists are just as capable of
embracing a fantasy
of going too far in cult type organizations as anyone else, as Jim Jones or any of those people. So it's a cult, and so is the Mormons. The Mormon religion is in fact a cult, and so you have a cultic religion heading up an effort to produce biblical stories that are not biblical, portraying Jesus in a certain light. In many cases good, but in many cases not so good. It's like setting a compass. If you set a compass for true north, which is where you want to go, you want to be true north. You set a compass for true north, but it's off just a little bit. What will happen? At your point of destiny, you're way off.
Right.
You're way off. So whenever portraying a narrative concerning Jesus, your compass should be true north. And you have a responsibility to make sure that your compass doesn't veer off even a half of a degree. Because if you do, at the end of this journey, you find yourself way away from where you want to be, from where you need to be. And I see The Chosen as very much that. In terms of its true north, their compass is set about 15 degrees off to the east.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, they'll end up way over there,
right.
And true north is this way. And that's the concern with the Chosen. It's wrong. Again, some of the scenes are wonderful. I saw one of the scenes with the woman who had an issue of blood for 10 years, and that was a wonderful scene.
Right.
Done really well. Now, if they can stick to doing that, they'll be all right. When they get off on, Jesus performing his sermon on the mount, getting dressed in special clothing, having the woman, attire him, dress him, kind of make him up for the sermon. They built him a stage. He rehearsed the sermon. He agonized over the presentation beforehand. No. Where does that come from? The account that we find in Matthew chapter 5 is he was at Capernaum at the sea, and there was a huge following of people, and it simply said he went up the mountain, called his disciples, and began to teach them.
was just the 12.
All of a sudden, in the Chosen,
turn this into 5,000 or 6,000 people, and
in the Chosen, he's on a stage. He has a certain attire. There's a screen on this stage. He's got his disciples overseeing the crowd. It's just he's not teaching his disciples. He's teaching the crowd. It's just wrong.
They must be getting financing from the mega churches that.
No doubt.
Right.
And the whole picture of Jesus, sort of wringing his hands over the sermon. Should I asking Matthew, should I include this? How do you feel about me saying this? Is this good? And Matthew is sort of, yeah, but I don't think what you said here is very good. What you plan to say here is very good. How could you arrive at such lies?
Right. How could you see Jesus as vacillating like that?
Yeah. And before he went up on stage to present or to perform in the movie, The Sermon on the Mount, the women were fussing over him. Fix your sash. Wear this. Don't wear that. Really, where does that come from? Well, it comes, like you said,
placating to
they are trying to give the impression or trying to present the idea that what you get in your mega churches is what Jesus did.
Right.
Which
giving credibility to them.
He didn't perform the Sermon on the Mount.
Right.
He called his disciples up to the top of the mountain and he preached a commentary on Torah.
Right.
Which is what the sermon is, according to the Bible. And so it's just unfortunate. So keep your eyes on the Chosen.
Right.
Keep your eyes on. I watch them. You know, I don't follow them with any dimension of interest other than just to understand what these people are doing.
Right.
And try to determine why. Why would they take the positions that they take?
So, and in reality, the Bible translators could not help but interject their own biases based upon their doctrinal beliefs into their translations, and that's happening with this as well.
Yeah, and again, the people that did that documentary on The Chosen, they featured some very important points, that a lot of what this character Jesus is saying in The Chosen is actually taken from the Book of Mormon.
Right.
How do you negotiate with that? How do you?
So the specific line was that they had Jesus saying
one
to
of
someone
the lines,
that he is the law.
Yeah.
And although Paul expounded on that, I believe, but Jesus never in his discussions with people made that comment.
Right. He is the Torah. Okay, so you can say he is the Word. He is the living Word. He is the Word of God.
Right.
But he's more than the Torah. You see, he's more than the law of God. He is way beyond that. He is, as I said, he is the living Word. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Much more than the Torah. So, again, Mormon ideology slipped into this show, the Chosen. When I first brought this before the congregation about a little over a year ago, I brought the concern concerning the Chosen, and there were a couple ladies there visiting, and they got totally bent out of shape with me. I was receiving emails, multiple emails come Monday morning from them, how incredibly disappointed they were with me, and why would any pastor, what kind of pastor are you that you would undermine or raise cautions about the Chosen? It's doing a wonderful thing. People are considering Jesus because of it. So I can argue against it, but I won't. The point is, you got to be careful about what you receive, because what you receive becomes part of your inner person.
Right.
And if you receive something concerning Jesus that's basically a lie, then that becomes part of your inner person. That becomes part of your being, and that will come right out of you. It will come right out of your mouth. Yep. So just be careful and keep your eye on this.
There can be no compromise with regard to righteousness and right living.
Yeah. Also, there is a idea that that the revival that's occurring now around the world is as a result of the Chosen. That's not true. It's absolutely not true. If you look at what happened at that university up in Kentucky about 6 months ago,
yes,
it had nothing to do with people looking at the Chosen. One person got up and confessed sin, and he was open and bold about his transgression, and in that environment there was an explosion of worship, adoration of God, and the Spirit moved again, and it became a powerful movement. It has nothing to do with the chosen.
Right.
It has to do. There's been many revivals over the decades, and none of it had anything to do with the chosen. So the idea that the chosen is somehow, bringing about this revival that we're seeing in the world today is just absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. The Holy Spirit is bringing about this revival. I don't think the Holy Spirit is fully engaged in the chosen.
Right.
No.
Yeah, I agree.
I might be wrong, but
So we have a great question. I think I understand why Hinduism is to be avoided, but what about yoga? Is yoga somehow an evil thing?
this is a very relevant question today, right? Because
It is.
Hinduism, yoga, like Hinduism, is gaining much acceptance in our civilization today, and it's a great concern. So yoga is being presented as, just exercise, right? You need to stretch. This goes a little beyond stretching. If you work out, you employ a little yoga, and it will help you to be more comfortable, more relaxed, more ready for your workout experience. So yoga is being presented in that way, but it's not. It is not just a stretching exercise or a series of stretching exercise, like same as with Tai Chi Quan, which is Tai Chi, but Tai Chi Quan is it's a Taiwanese form of exercise that you can also incorporate into being a martial art. There are aspects of Tai Chi that are very, very spiritual, that invokes the inner being, the Qi, the inner Qi. Qi is the inner force that resides within every human being, according to what they believe. Tai Chi Quan is using exercises to invoke the Qi force in us. Well, yoga has the same type of an effect. It is supposed to invoke the Kundalini spirit, and the Kundalini spirit is this Qi force that's in us, that empowers us, that gives us comfort, clarity. It gives us, it's like our salvation. So yeah, when you start talking about a Kundalini spirit, and the Kundalini spirit is represented as a serpent that wraps itself around your spine. And you, just by me saying that, you understand that it's in the realm of evil.
It's a snake.
It's a serpent.
It's a
Kundalini
serpent.
spirit is a serpent. So they don't call it the Kundalini spirit, right? But it is.
Right.
It's the Kundalini. They invoke the Kundalini. So don't even like to talk about it and mention those words, articulate those words. But this is what yoga is, and you can't get away from it. You can say, I'm going to yoga classes. For me, it's just exercise. I'm stretching. Listen, I stretch. I go to the gym and I stretch my legs. I do all those things. But it's got nothing to do with invoking any spirit within me. Many people get trapped in or roped into yoga and the higher aspects of yoga, the spiritual aspects of yoga, unawares. Yoga is very evangelistic. In fact, so is Hinduism. Hinduism is very evangelistic. Their purpose is to spread their ideology, and yoga is very much like that. There's an aspect of yoga, the yoga industry in this country, that wants to propagate. You say, well, it's all business. It's not just business, it's ideology.
Right.
These people absolutely believe in what they're doing, and they are wanting to propagate it. I know this about Hinduism. Again, I have a lot of background in Hinduism, and I understand very well how Hindus are always excited about bringing you into their belief system. I don't know if you've ever experienced anything with Hinduism.
I haven't.
All right. What about yoga? Any family members or anything?
Jonathan does.
Okay, yoga. So,
Again, stretching.
Yeah, yeah. Stretching, loosening up for workouts. Yeah, I do that.
I've always discouraged it because of the experience that I had in deliverance.
Yeah.
It was exposed in that.
So you understand the spiritual component to it,
Yeah.
especially since I mentioned the Kundalini. And that's just one aspect of the spiritual component with yoga. There are many. Certain positions invoke certain spirits. In Tai Chi Chuan, you'd say certain movements would invoke certain aspects of the chi, right? The inner force. Well, it's all spiritism. It's all from the standpoint of of me and you. It's demonic.
Yeah.
You start invoking spirits to alter your state of consciousness, to enhance your sense of well-being. You're in the realm of demonic activity. That's from, and someone would say, well, you're just intolerant and negative. Okay.
Things we've all been called.
Yeah. But that's the perspective we have. So, Jim, speaking coming from the standpoint of the average American relative to yoga and Hinduism, excuse me, what's your opinion? What do you see?
I think for someone who doesn't have a real faith walk, it seems harmless.
Right.
It seems like stretching. And based upon the yoga instructor that you have, it may be focused only on the stretching attributes until one day they're sick and somebody else comes in to teach the class.
Right. So your yoga instructors in most of your yoga classes are not going to be swamis. You know what a swami is, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to be swamis. They're not going to come in there all decked off as swamis. But ultimately, the swamis are behind every yoga experience. Because it started with the swamis. Who are the swamis? The Swami movement, or the swamis, are ascended Hindus. Hindus who have ascended to higher levels of existence, higher levels of consciousness, through meditation, through yoga, through fasting, through, going out into the wilderness and spending 6 months doing nothing. They've altered their state of consciousness. Here in our country with the American Indians, with the First Nations, some of the First Nations would use, peyote and substances to enhance the same sort of experiences. In Hinduism, you do that as well, but there are extremely high levels of consciousness, or levels of nirvana that you can attain to, and yoga is very important in attaining to that level of consciousness. And yoga on that level is not just exercise. It's very much invoking these different spirits. So I will caution anyone in regards to yoga to avoid it. There are stretching exercises, you can get them on the internet, that does not include any spiritual invokement.
Right.
And why would you want to invoke something spiritual to begin with if your goal is to stretch or to loosen up? I loosen up, I stretch. Some of what I do can be easily interpreted as yoga moves. All right. But they're not yoga moves because I'm not doing them with the intent to attain to some level of inner consciousness or greater consciousness. I'm doing it so that my legs won't hurt me when I decide I'm going to, walk or do leg presses. I'm stretching.
Right.
That's fine. But again, we have to guard ourselves from all of the different aspects of yoga that involves deep spirituality. There are aspects of yoga that deals with astral traveling. Deep meditation that can take the yogi into a place of actually leaving their bodies to transcend their bodies, and of course that can't be good. That's from a Christian perspective.
It's witchcraft.
You're venturing into a place where no human being is supposed to be.
Right. Right.
All right, so we can go real far afield with this, which I don't want to do. I want to stay on the question. So, All right, so the first part of the question, I think I understand why Hinduism is to be avoided. Okay, so do you really know why? All right, so let me address the first part of that question. You think you know why. Hinduism is absolutely the most unadulterated form of ancient paganism that still exists today. Hinduism as an actual religion, an actual philosophy, it came about around 2000 BC, 700 BC, and that's, relatively speaking, not very old. It's around the time of Abraham is when they began to constitute as an ideology, a system of belief. But the thing about Hinduism is, even though it's only 4,000 years old roughly, their stories, their narratives, and their practices goes back to the pre-flood civilization. And this is what the Hindu movement, the ones who constituted what we know as Hinduism 4,000 years ago, this is what they wanted to attain to. They wanted to get back to that ancient existence, that ancient world civilization before the current civilization. In Hinduism, they would just tell you that there have been many civilizations before this one, and that this one is destined to be destroyed, and another civilization will come following this one. So they point back to previous civilizations and their stories, their holy texts, the Sanskrit narratives, Vedas, all point to occurrences that occurred before the flood. We would refer to them as pre-flood, the antediluvian civilization. Okay, how long did that civilization last? Roughly 1,000 years, right?
Yeah.
So a lot can happen in 1,000 years. Adam, the fall of Adam, Cain and Abel, the birth of Seth, and all that occurred following that. A lot happened.
Right.
Right. By the time we get to Genesis chapter 6, when God determined that he had to put an end to that civilization, a lot had happened. It had become so corrupt in the earth that God said that all of creation has corrupted its way. That's what we see in the word there is direct, has corrupted its way. And that all of creation was ra, evil. That's the Hebrew word, ra. And when you look at the Hebrew word ra, there's a connotation of self-oriented, selfish, all about themselves. So when you look at Genesis chapter 6 in its context, you see that the Nephilim were on the earth. Who were the Nephilim? They were the offspring of the sons of God, who were angels, who took wives of men, daughters of men, to be wives, and had offspring. Now, Genesis chapter 6, 1 to 4, really fits into the Hindu narratives. I mean, really well. Of course, the Hindu narratives gives you thousands of stories about what happened during that period. The point is, you had roughly 1,000 years of horrible, horrible things happening on the earth.
Right.
And all of these things were recorded, and the Hindus believe that they have all of the history that occurred before the flood, and they look back at it. Part of looking back at it and seeing them as holy texts is somehow invoking the demigods.
Yes, right. It would.
The Nephilim.
Right.
All right, so we need to talk about our position on demons.
Yeah.
Right. From our point of view, what is a demon? A demon is not a fallen angel. The fallen angels are fallen angels. They are sons of God. The demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, their offspring. So God created the angels. He created the sons of God. They are held in chains, according to what we see in the Bible. You know, in Jude, taken from the book of Enoch, the fallen angels are captured and they're kept in chains. Their spirits roam the earth. Their spirits can have influence in the earth, but through what means? When God brought the flood, he destroyed the Nephilim, the demigods. They were not kept in prison. They were killed. But they were sentient beings. They were beyond sentient beings. They were really advanced creatures. They were sons of angels. and men. So they had souls. They had spirits.
Sure.
So when their bodies died in the flood, their spirits roamed the earth. God did not take ownership of them. So their spirits are roaming the earth. Their bodies are in the dust. So these disembodied spirits are the demons, what we call demons. In Hinduism, they entreat those demigods. Mm-hmm. They entreat them. You know, I was at Denny's one time across the street here when Denny's was actually there. And I was having dinner with a couple of people from the church, and we were talking, and I became aware of the fact that there was a couple, maybe 3 people over to my left that were paying attention to what we were saying. Mm-hmm. And I made some statements about Hinduism. Well, one of the people, she was a lady, she was clearly the most dominant person among the 3 of them. She came over and she began to state the position of Hinduism.
Right.
She wanted to clear it up and basically say to us that they serve the same God that we serve. We just have many other demigods that we also serve. And she said it's sort of like with Catholicism. You have saints that you also pray to. Well, we have these, and she didn't say demigods, of course. I said demigods.
Right.
But the point that she made was, in Hinduism, we have basically one God, and his name is Brahman. Brahman is the creator God. He's also referred to as the Father God.
Right.
He's represented by them as a bull, dominant creature, bull. But Brahman, in their belief system, is always aloof and abstract. He's never counted with the demigods. He's always at odds with the demigods. So, and she said, well, that Brahman is the God of the Bible, and we recognize him and serve him. But like the Canaanites, who recognized the El, the God of the Bible, they also served an array of gods. Right?
Right.
So I didn't engage this woman. I just said, I said, and I allowed her to know that I knew what she was saying.
Right.
And once she realized that I knew, she kind of took offense to it, and she took off. All right. So Hinduism is a religion very much like what the Canaanites had. The Canaanites had primarily four deities, primarily. They had others. They would worship any deity. But the Canaanites had primarily 4. Who was the El? The El was the Father God, again, creation God, who was angry.
All the time.
All the time.
Well, they were screwing up all the time.
He was never at peace with them. So eventually they relinquished the El. But their primary 3 gods were Baal, Ishtar, and Molech. But they had an array of other gods. The Hindu religion is very much like that, but they have many more gods that they worship. And of course, the difference about the Hindu religion is that they survived until today. Mm-hmm. And not only have they survived until today, they're gaining momentum in the Western world. Yeah. I mean, we talked about this Global Nation for International Peace movement. Right. A Hindu country right here that we're paying for.
Right.
We bought their, we paid for their currency.
Christian America has
we paid for their currency, which is
Hindu hole in the middle of it.
Absolutely. And so Hinduism is extremely precarious. It's something we have to look at, something we have to be aware of and conscious of, because it is being accepted. Yeah. And apart from that nation, every community in the States now are being joined with ashrams, Hindu temples. And Hindu communities are cropping up everywhere in this country. Yoga outfits are also. So back to the essence of the question: Is yoga an evil thing? And the short answer is yes. Yes, it is. If you want to stretch and exercise, you can find many calisthenics. There are all sorts of exercises that you engage in. You do not have to do one where you're meditating, one that you do in a meditative state, and you chant Om, Om and Namaste, and you get into all of the other aspects of Hinduism that's included in yoga. You don't need it. You're engaging in something that's ancient, that actually points back to the pre-flood civilization. So is it possible, if what I said is true concerning the demigods, the Nephilim, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, the demons, if what I said is true, I fully believe it is. But if that's true, you are literally sitting in a yoga class invoking demons.
Asking them to come in.
To empower me.
Right.
Here's a position. This is going to invoke a certain spirit.
Yeah.
Why would you want to get engaged in something like that?
Right.
All right. And it's very influential. It's very influential. We see in the Bible that during the time of Isaiah, very early in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah addressed an incredible sin that was occurring in Judah at that time. And it's referred to as influences from the east. So that we find that in Isaiah chapter 2, 5, and 6. Maybe you can read that for us.
Come, house of Jacob, and let us walk in the light of the Lord. For thou hast abandoned thy people, the house of Jacob, because they are filled with influences from the east. They are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they strike bargains with the children of the foreigners.
The only spiritual influence that exists at that time from the east, really, you see, the Zoroastrians didn't exist at this time.
Okay.
They came around somewhere around 500 BC. Isaiah is speaking here about things that were occurring back 9 BC to 8 BC. So the only real influence that they would have had from the east is Hinduism. And why? Because of Solomon. Solomon had wives as far as from India.
Right.
Ophir is the Hebrew word for India. And he had very tight association with Ophir. He did a lot of trade in gold and spices from Ophir. He had wives from Ophir. Now, these Hindu wives that came over from Ophir, they didn't come over, wanting to convert to ancient Judaism. No. They came over determined to maintain their Hindu ideology. Remember, Hinduism is and always has been very evangelistic. So what did Solomon do? He built high places throughout the land of Israel to worship Hindu gods and other gods, the gods of the Edomites, the god. One of the things about the ancient world and paganism is that they amalgamated all of the different systems into very simplistic orders. So in other words, they would recognize that the god of the Edomites, not so much the Edomites, but the god of the Ammonites or the Moabites is very much like the god of Ophir. And so they're the same God. Let's build a shrine to this one God, and they'll give him a name. So me and you, we went, and Dolores as well, we went to Tel Arad.
Right. I was just thinking about that because there it is. Yeah.
Influences from the east, right? So we went to Tel Arad, which is an amazing place because it still stands today. And Solomon built that place.
He did.
Right.
After he built the temple in Jerusalem, and after God said no other place.
He built the high places, and Tel Arad was one of those many high places. Most of the high places were destroyed by some of the more righteous kings. King Asa.
Right.
And
Arad was probably far enough from Jerusalem.
For whatever reason, Tel Arad stood. The most amazing thing about Tel Arad, it was refortified along the way. Other kings came along and built around it. But the most amazing thing about Tel Arad is the ashram. I won't call it the Holy of Holies. The archaeologists call it the Holy of Holies. I will call it what it was, an ashram, the temple where the deity sat. It's still there. Yeah. It is still, and I walked into it. Yeah. And so what about this ashram, what they are calling the Holy of Holies? What about this space, this location is amazing. Well, when you approach it, you have 2 stone altars, about 2.5 feet high. two stone altars, one on the right, one on the left. The one on the left had the residue of frankincense, which is indicative of Hebraic worship.
Right.
Temple worship. Frankincense. The one on the right, when they excavated this site back in 1934, they didn't know what that residue was on the altar on the right.
Right.
They knew there was a residue there, but they couldn't figure it out. It was only about 10 or 15 years ago they figured out that that's cannabis. Ganja.
Yeah.
And I use the word ganja because it relates to the Ganges River,
Right.
where the Hindu pundits, the Hindu shaman, would do their pujas on the Ganges River, and they would use ganja, cannabis, to entreat their gods, their demonic, the demigods. So that's a pretty standard practice among Hindu shamans or pundits. They would use cannabis, and the usage of the cannabis will enhance an altered state of consciousness by which they can entreat their gods.
Invite them in other words.
Right.
Yeah.
And not just invite them in, entreat their help.
Okay.
So how it works, someone in the community, people in the community will go to the pundit or go to the shaman, and they would say, Pundit, I have a problem with my daughter. She's in love with a Muslim boy, and I don't want that to happen. I wanted to marry a good Hindu boy. Pundit would say, okay, get this, bring this. I need some of that. Bring it together, and we'll do a puja. And all these things are put together. Usually it's food and stuff that they're going to use to entreat their demonic god with. And that pundit will go to Kali, for instance, or one of the more hostile Hindu gods, and entreat that god to intervene. The pundit invariably would use cannabis, ganja. In the process of invoking that demon, that Hindu god, he uses the cannabis to bring him closer and to open up the spirit realm for the work that has to be done.
Right.
In many cases, Jim, that Muslim boy would commit suicide.
Oh, that's awful.
It's I saw it with my own eyes in
Right.
the community that I grew up in. They would drink, in many cases, they would drink what's called gramaxone, which is a pesticide. There was a time when gramaxone was referred to as Indian tonic because people were killing themselves all the time. And a lot of those suicidal cases had to do with exactly what I talked about, going to the pundit. So you're talking about something that's incredibly powerful. It's demonic, it's spiritual.
In witchcraft, they just call that a curse.
But what I witnessed with my own eyes in that community for 7 years was incredibly real and powerful. You saw with your own eyes the effects of it. I have a sister and a brother that got tangled up in Hinduism, and I saw how horribly that connection is. I saw how powerful it is. So it's real. You're talking about something that's real.
Yeah.
And for me, it's a very sensitive issue, right?
Sure.
Very sensitive issue. So we walked up to the high place at Telerad, and there's this altar here that has the residue of cannabis on it. And you say, well, why cannabis? Because the priest, pundit, shaman,
Right.
was entreating the deity. And chances are it was a Hindu deity.
Right.
They didn't use the word Hindu then. The word Hindu comes from the word Indus, or Hindus as they would pronounce it. Indus Valley, the Indus River, the Indus Valley.
Okay.
And so the word Hindu came as a result of the
So
people
Hinduism is the religion. The people, call themselves Hindis.
right, from
And
the
that's where we get the word Indian.
Indian, from the Indus Valley, right? The ancient valley right between India and Pakistan, coming down from the Himalayas.
Okay.
And it's believed that the water that comes down from the Himalayas down into that valley is holy and so on. And,
Yes. Gotcha.
So in this ashram, what I call an ashram, the Holy of Holies at Telerad, I also recognized as soon as I walked in, and this was really stark for me. Of course, there was no idol. The idol wasn't there.
Right. Right.
More than likely in ancient times there was an idol there, a literal idol that they would put flowers on, put water on, put food in front of, and worship that literal idol of one of the demon gods. right to the left, right to the right of where I was standing, to the left of where the idol would be, was a stone, a rounded stone, elongated rounded stone, right there. In every ashram, that stone is there. And the stone is the stone, you do libations on the stone. That's what they do.
Right, right.
And the stone represents the soul of the idol. And that's why they would put water on the stone and they would do libations on the stone, because the stone is actually the life force that's in this idol. That's what they believe, according to their system.
Right, right.
The stone is still there. They didn't move the stone.
Right.
I was amazed by that. There
The
it is.
archaeologists are going, what do we do with this?
I'm hard-pressed to think that they didn't know what that was.
Right, didn't know what it was.
Right, because
But it's good that they left it there because it's evidence of what was really happening.
frankly, I would destroy it.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah,
Frankly, I would crush it into dust. But you see my point, though. Solomon, because of his sin, and Solomon sinned horribly, God said, I'm going to judge Solomon because of his sin.
Yeah.
Because of his sin, he allowed all this Hinduism, what we call Hinduism now, into the land of Israel. And Isaiah referred to it as influences from the East. Well, here we are today, and we are embracing the influences of the East.
Yeah.
You talk about your son, who is not influenced by it, but he's, partial to yoga.
Right.
And doesn't mean that he's going to get involved in it emotionally. It means that he's seeing it from a certain point of view right now.
Right.
But I know people, and I think you know people as well. You taught in high school for a long time.
Yes.
I know people that drive around with namaste stickers on their cars and ohms, symbols of the ohms. And I'm saying, do they even know what they're into?
Right.
Do they have any idea how deadly?
And we're banging on Hinduism, but Buddhism is just a spin-off from Hinduism.
Well, Buddhism. So Buddha was a good Hindu.
Right.
All right, so Hinduism, as we know it, goes back 2000 BC. But they actually point to events that occurred before the flood, 6,000 years ago. And they try to invoke the demonic forces of that period. And they do. Buddha was a good Hindu boy, who lived about 500 BC.
Okay.
Whether or not he was actually overweight, who knows?
Right. Somebody made a statue, and there it is.
The Indonesians, they project him as a slender, normal-sized person.
Okay.
The Hindus present him as a little chubby. The Chinese presents him as a huge, overweight guy. The Japanese, he's...
Sumu.
Yeah. But Buddha was a good Swami. You can say that. He was a good Swami, a good devotee of Krishna, one of the Hindu gods. Okay. Krishna was one of the principal Hindu gods. He was a good devotee of Krishna, and he became a great person. He became known for his great spirituality, even miracles and so on. And so he became, in and of himself, a deity.
Right.
So Buddhism is just Hinduism.
Right.
And so many times yoga is more closely associated in our minds with Buddhism than Hinduism. Right. But that's not the case at all, because true yoga goes back to the most ancient and the most pagan forms of Hinduism. Again, it is supposed to invoke in the devotee a sense of empowerment from unseen forces.
Right, right.
It's supposed to prolong your life, give you powers, and all these things. So yes, I would say for sure, yoga is evil. If you embrace it, for anything more than simple exercises, it's absolutely something that you have to avoid. I'm speaking here to Christians, but I'm speaking in a very general sense also.
Sure.
That the average person, believer or non-believer, you stay away from yoga, because it brings with it that strong Hindu influence that can really, really, really alter your state of being, your person. Now, many people will hear this and say, you're just an alarmist. I know many Hindus, and they're wonderful people, right? They're kind and they're gentle, and that's all true. You go to their pujas, there's a sense of calm and solace, and they sing they chant such wonderful songs, and they're so benevolent and blessed. Yeah. I lived in a Muslim community for 7 years. In that Muslim community, you had about 15% of the Indians were Muslims. And the other 85% were Hindus. And yeah, my friends were Hindus. I had some Muslim friends because I saw in the Hindus a much more relaxed people, a much more calm people than the Muslims. Muslims were very aggressive.
Yes.
They controlled the community. The 15% of them actually had dominance in the community. But wait till you provoke the Hindus.
Okay.
Once you hit that button, and the Hindus are now, for a lack of a better word, razzed up, agitated, step out of the way. Because you're going to see something that will shock you once you press that button. Get them to the other. In other words, once you get them to the point where they're being driven by the same spirits that they worship, step aside. Because they're different people. That's when you see the true nature of Hinduism.
Yeah.
I know it well. I've seen it with my own eyes.
Okay.
The worship of Kali used to occur in the community I grew up in. The worship of Kali. Hindu goddess Kali. The worship of Kali occurred once a year, where they will have a procession, and they'll take with them a young lady down to the river. That young lady was pregnant towards the end of her pregnancy. And at the river is where they would abort the child. Now, it was legal because it was abortion, but it was actually human sacrifice.
Right.
And this happened on a yearly basis.
Right.
I remember vividly the procession and the evil sense of it. My friends, and I was 14 or 15, my friends would tell me, you can't go over there. I wanted to see what was going on. What's this about? You can't go over there. If you go over there, something really bad is going to happen to you. So they were engaging in the worst form of worship, worshiping a God who demanded human sacrifice.
Right.
In Kali. So all this sounds incredibly, maybe even bizarre and strange, but I would encourage people to research what I said. Everything I said is verifiable, and most importantly, we should take the threat of Hinduism seriously.
Right.
Because it is a threat. It is a threat to our civilization.
Right.
It's being presented on a platter right now where it's pleasant. It's, you drive past the Hindu temple around the corner. It's such a beautiful place. Look at the architecture. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. I should go visit. And you go visit, and it's such a sublime environment. People are so loving and peaceful. No, don't be fooled by it. Don't be fooled by it. Our greatest minds are fooled by it.
Right.
Our nuclear physicists, our greatest minds are fooled by it. Now, question before we end. Why is it, Jim, that our greatest minds, the nuclear physicists, all of these scientists, why are they duped into Hinduism? Why did that happen?
Well, all right. Just from bystander perspective, I've attended many in essence, dead, no faith, no real relationship with God in a myriad of Protestant churches that I've visited and attended in my lifetime. And I think their impression of biblical is boring and dead.
Yeah, they've rejected the God of the Bible.
Right.
I would go beyond that. I would say the reason that our greatest minds are being lured into this ancient pagan religion is because they have committed themselves to disprove God.
Right.
They've rolled up their sleeves to oppose God. And because of that, many of them work to disprove God. And because of their efforts to disprove God and undermine the God of the Bible, not just reject him, but undermine him,
right,
they are susceptible to the very demonic entities that are worshipped in Hinduism. If what I'm saying is true concerning the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim being demons, and these demons are actually the demigods that are worshipped in Hinduism, if that's true, wouldn't they actually be jubilant And would they not want to work within the context of these great minds concerning propagating who they are, these demonic activity? You know, Hitler considered himself the hope of the Aryan nation, right? Hinduism and Aryanism, they go hand in hand. I'm not sure if you know this.
It's crazy.
But they do.
Okay.
Hitler was more a Hindu than he was a Lutheran.
Right.
He was more Hindu. He had crews of Nazis over in India searching for artifacts, searching for relevant objects of pertinent to Hinduism.
Right.
He had people searching for the Brahmanas that Lord Krishna made, these flying objects that had the power to destroy whole cities, according to the Vedas.
Right.
He had people searching for these things. The swastika that he embraced for Nazi Germany is a Hindu symbol.
Yes.
So
I have seen that.
Yeah, it's a Hindu symbol.
Temple.
It's a Hindu symbol. And so you have this incredible thing where highly, highly intelligent people, the Nazis were not fools.
Right.
They were not, they were very, very highly educated people. The Thule society that gave us the Nazis, they were great minds of the 1800s. They were scientists, they were theosophists, they were thinkers, but they had rejected God. And they were committed to disprove God. They were the evolutionists. That's who they were. So these people who were very, very sharp, very smart, they entered into a dimension of demonic oppression because of their desire to disprove God, their hatred towards God. And I think that's what's happening with our Tony Naders of the world, with this country within our country. They're haters of God. Bright as they are complete fools because they fall into this ancient, oppressive, demonic religion. And should they not repent, they will answer for it.
Right. Right. Well, that's our program. Surely this question and the answers we provided have raised other questions in your thinking. You are at liberty to share them with us. You can email us at voice@buildupzion.org. Again, voice@buildupzion.org. We have some guests coming. You're welcome to come to those meetings if you're available. We're having Yair Levi on Sunday night, May 21st at 8 p.m. It's a musical presentation.
It's kind of a concert.
Popular Israeli music, Hebrew. And then Jonathan Feldstein, he pronounces it. We'll be here Sunday, May 28th at 7 p.m. Once again, if you're available, you're at liberty to join us for those meetings. Till next week, shalom.